Welcome to the Domain Name Law Show. We're here every Tuesday, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. This is where we discuss legal news in the domain space and we review UDRP decisions. There's 3 co-hosts to the show. My name is Todd Ryan. I'm one of them. My other 2 co-hosts are Jeff Neuman and David Michaels. I'd like to say hi to the guys before we get rolling today. Hey, Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Last week's call was a marathon, but enjoyable. So hope can't do 2 hours today, but I think it was good to get some feedback from listeners and answer questions. So I think um, let's keep doing it.
Yep, and we go 60 to 90 minutes here. We say 60 to 75. We go to 90. That's already stretching it. So, yeah, that's our max. Last week we did go 2 hours. It was cuckoo, crazy. But no, today I was going to mention if you want to speak on our first topics, feel free to come up. We're going to try to get through them quick so we can get to our UDRP cases by the 30, David knows, 45-minute mark at least, so we can get through those. But a lot to cover in this first section. But first, David, how are you doing today?
I'm all right.
Okay, that's plenty. Say no more. You're all right. That's all we needed to know. Hey, I don't know if it was a mistake or if Anthony wanted to join us because he had something to say quickly. But like I said, we certainly want some input on our first subjects that we're going to cover today. Hey, Anthony, how you doing? Maybe it was a mistake. Sometimes people accidentally request to be a speaker or the system automatically does it. Thought it was unusual. Why would Antone request to be a speaker so soon? But anyway, Anthony, if you're there listening, feel free to chime in when we have, and the rest of you, raise your hand if you really have something to say because we're going to jump right in now. Okay, so there was a lot of news over this past week. By the way, if you want to check out our outline, you can see it at DNL, domain name law, dnlshow.com/outline. If you're listening on replay, we really appreciate it. You can see the outline there, and we cover, we're on B1, that's domain industry and legal news. Well, there was an article about domain investing. Really, it was about digital assets, and they talked about tickets. They talked about, I can't remember what else. I mean, I should know. There was only like 3 things primarily, but in domains. And basically, it was like, do domain investors get in the way of legitimate businesses? Or I say other businesses because domaining is, I consider it a little bit legitimate to be a domain investor. But does it get in the way of businesses when trying to, grow on the internet or, just build their business? And they were mostly talking about how the article, well, the first article I'll touch on is by this group, Digital Citizens Alliance, and the title of it, When It Comes to Digital Markets, Trust Can't Be Secondary. Okay, so it's an article, and I have the link there at B1A. And so this article goes through, at the very beginning of it, it does talk about something that Trump did, ending price gouging by middlemen in entertainment industry. And I bring that up because the term gouging is how they sort of describe domain investors as we buy domain names, we sit on them, and then we charge these exorbitant prices. And there's some that believe, and I know, I think it's more than we think, that believe that it stymies internet growth. And there was several interesting things in this article, but it was obviously funded by a group that wants to. I mean, people are saying they're gentlemen that I guess wrote most of it, or someone was formerly a VeriSign employee or an executive at VeriSign. And
Yep.
is
Well,
that true? So people were alluding that they think VeriSign wants to
so
take control of the markets again. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, the executive director of the alliance, his name's Tom Galvin, was for a very long time at VeriSign, responsible for lobbying the U.S. government, for a number of years to get, to keep the .com contract and to have the ability to raise prices. So Welcome to the beginning of VeriSign's external PR campaign to increase or change the .com agreement so that they have the ability to raise prices higher and or more often. Um, this is very typical of what their strategy is. They use these undisclosed, or I shouldn't say undisclosed, these associations or PR firms that you are not able to find out the members, right? So if you go to this digital alliance, and I went to the Form 990, which is the all nonprofits have to file a tax Form 990 and have to indicate the sources of the revenue and or how much revenue, their expenses, the top paid employees, things like that. Every nonprofit has to do it. So of course the you see Tom Galvin's the executive director. His wife is also involved on the board in some way, but essentially they've had a I think it was 1.4 million in membership dues received, but they won't disclose and have not disclosed who their members are. Um, I think you can look at the board of directors, get an idea of some of the members. You have like Warner Brothers, and there's also a couple associations or groups that fight illegal pharmacies. But you can bet that VeriSign's in heavily in the mix, and you can bet that this is by this is the part of the VeriSign campaign. And I think I predicted this well, I know I predicted it. I think I did it on the show too, that, you know, VeriSign's done very well under Republican administrations. It's when they get, it's the only time that they get their true benefits, the ability to raise prices. The latest amendment was during the last Trump administration. So they're making their move. And as they said um, I think as they responded to the NTIA last year, they said that, we VeriSign need to raise prices for the market, but you shouldn't be mad at us for raising prices. Those evil domain investors, they're the problem, the secondary market. So this is all part of that.
So it's interesting how they vilify ticket sellers and real estate homeowners like to sell like they rent out their homes. I guess they just buy up a whole bunch of residential homes and rent them out. There's some corporations that do that, and they have like 80,000 or 100,000 homes. But they didn't call out the hotels in Las Vegas to charge all those resort fees. The ones that are like $50 a night when the hotel advertised rate is $10 a night. That didn't exist in the 90s. But if you turn to page 26 of this report, they cite your case, the pay rewards case. Did you read that, Jeff?
I did not. What did they say?
They said that the resale of domains can be fraught, whether domain investors or not. Recently, a company sued after an agreement to purchase the domain name Pay Rewards for $38,000, only to have their seller renege and demand $380,000 once he learned the identity of the buyer. According to Domain Name Wire, Dean Adams acquired payrewards.com in 2022. After learning that the buyer was pay.com.au, Adams raised the price tenfold and threatened to sell the name to someone else. It goes on. A Denver district judge last month granted a temporary restraining order preventing Adams from selling the domain name to another party, per the court's docket. And they have a link to it. The thing is, they mischaracterize Adams as a domain speculator. Was he a speculator? Do you know, Jeff?
No idea. Yeah, I mean, I didn't find, uh, but we didn't get into the discovery, but I didn't find any other names that this Dean Adams, or even if that's his real name, that he owned.
Yeah, so they characterize him. as a domain reseller, or in the same phrase as investor or not. But I think the problem is they don't recognize that domain investors are professional. And they set a price, that's the price. And they're not going to renege and demand $380,000 once they figure out who the buyer is. It doesn't happen because you're professional, you know what's going on, this is how it works. But somebody who owns one domain name or 10 domain names, and this is his ticket, this is his rocket ship to the moon, and he didn't know that, how things work. So I think it's better when there's efficient markets with professional domain investors who know what they're doing, are educated, and know how things work. That's why should be an argument for a resale market as opposed to against it. What do you think?
I mean, I think we cite here, right, Todd, to the Zach and Nat's response. Well, it wasn't technically a response, but you could tell it was generated because of that. And I thought that was pretty good on I think it's CircleID. Yeah, that's 1C. And I think the response by Rick Schwartz was not helpful at all, because it was Rick Schwartz kind of being Rick Schwartz, where he sort of threatened the Digital Citizens Alliance, and kind of it wasn't the best response, right? You don't combat these kinds of things by calling other people names and telling them that they're your new public enemy number one. Um, I don't know if that's cited in here, Todd. Is it the Rick Schwartz response?
I don't know. It's not cited with what Zach and Nat put together, but certainly mentioned in the Digital Citizens report, if we want to call it a report. And quickly, Jeff, what you said, VeriSign's external PR strategy, right, makes a lot of sense. I mean, and thanks for clearing that up. Other people have mentioned that the gentleman, right, that put this together was formerly with VeriSign, but it does make sense. And you did mention it before that VeriSign would like to be able to increase rates. And you mentioned that this administration, when Trump was in charge before, is when they got more things, I guess, decisions in their favor. VeriSign did. So I think not only does VeriSign want to increase their renewal rates for .com, but they also, I mean, I guess if they really get their way, they would control, the .com aftermarket. Paige, thanks for joining us. I know you have some thoughts on this, comments, questions. The stage is yours.
Well, I wasn't really sure if I saw the report you guys are talking about. I do have a lot of thoughts on VeriSign, but I think VeriSign's in an interesting position because they need ICANN to be the perceived monopoly power, so that they're not a monopoly. We're just one of a bunch of registries that happen to operate. You know what I mean? And if they ever did assert, in my opinion, monopoly-like power, I think you'd see things like Web3 come up to really, to really go against them. So they've always been in a tough spot. They're like GoDaddy. They're a paranoid market dominant company. So they're a market dominant company that acts like the sky is falling. You know what I mean? I don't know what that's worth to the show today, but that's the way I always see them, is in that light. But as long as they let us rent $1 million assets for $11 a year, I like it the way it is.
They seem awful greedy. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, they have a patent on, VeriSign has a patent on allocating expired domain names to certain registrars based on certain factors. And that speaks to collusion and monopoly violations, like left, right, and center. Like there should not be colluding with registrars and say, okay, well, I'm going to give you this batch and you can have that batch. And
yeah, but David, I'm sorry to interrupt, but collusion, There's a fine line between collusion and a bottom-up consensus process where the registry stakeholders group comes up with a proposal that just happens to benefit all the participants in the registry stakeholders group. And then there's collusion. So
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. I think VeriSign has a ton of patents, a lot of them. I am unaware of any time that they've tried to enforce their patents. I think they do it to build up their value so that if they go private or get bought out, it's certainly it's on their books as an asset. But I think a lot of VeriSign's patents are kind of bullshit, excuse my language, in the sense that a lot of them weren't novel at the time. But of course, patent examiners don't necessarily know that. And some of the patents they have were done before, and then other patents they have are so niche, like, it wouldn't prevent you from doing those certain things, it would just prevent you in the exact same way that VeriSign does it. But again, I think in order to bring kind of collusion or any antitrust complaints, they would have to be seen to enforce those and then restrict competition through the enforcement of those. And to my knowledge, they haven't done that yet. But when VeriSign wants something, uh, with the .com agreement or .net back in 2004, 2005, when it was quote rebid, they will lobby like hell. They will use external sources that are really kind of a shadow of them, and this is just par for the course for them. Uh, but the thing that they've done in this case is they've sort of partnered, not sort of, they've partnered with um, organizations, and we don't know the exact ones, although if you look at the board, you can see a couple of them that fight online the illegal sale of online pharmaceuticals, counterfeit, because of Warner Brothers. And so what they're trying to say is that because there's this secondary market, and I disagree with this completely, but the secondary market essentially is responsible for a bunch of the fraud that happens on the internet, and they're trying to draw those parallels. Um, they did it with the ticketing agencies, um, and so I think it's a very loose, not even loose. It's there may be some correlation, but it's not causation, and they're trying to spin it. So it's um, it's interesting because this time they have some other external partners because there is some DNS abuse going on, not because of the secondary market at all, but because fraudsters buy domain names and they use them for illegal purposes. Um, but domain investors are not fraudsters, right? So they're trying to portray all domain investors as squatters and fraudsters and bad people, and drawing this correlation that doesn't exist.
I think they're not trying to say, and I'm going to, play the side of the digital alliance. I don't think they're trying to say all domain investors are fraudsters. And David, you were saying domain investors are professionals. Some are, not all are. So the truth of the matter is, not all domain investors are professional. They will renege on a deal, okay? Especially some, you'll hear them say it. Oh, if I know it's somebody that's got a lot, then I'm going to raise the price. Now, usually they don't raise the price after they've agreed to a price, but some have. Basically, the bottom line is not all domain investors are professional. If there was not only a code of conduct, but like even a real estate code of how realtors have to abide by certain laws and regulations, would certainly be helpful. But I think the alliance did do a good job of using these ticket scalpers as an example, and then these short-term rentals. Meaning, of course, domain investors are going to say, here's why it's different than ticket scalping. And remember back in the old days when, we talk about, black market is illegal. A gray market is really not necessarily illegal, frowned upon, as they put it in there. So remember back in the day, you go to an event, there's a ticket scalper out front, and then, the cops chasing them away. And whether they're breaking laws or not is, and if it's criminal or if it's not criminal, I guess the point is, people don't like ticket scalpers. Okay, unless you're somebody who got a great price. If you're smart enough to wait until the first quarter, then the scalper comes down in price. But I guess the point is, no one likes what Ticketmaster was doing. No one likes what any step up, get all these tickets, and then now but it is limited. The number is limited. When I think about Nat and Zach's article, we're going to get into that. How they try to bust a lot of myths about domain investors. I'm thinking about the argument the other side is going to have so we can be ready. Because if this thing would get momentum, meaning, say, I don't know, gets picked up by some legislators and they think, yeah, what is going on there? This is weird. And VeriSign, lobbies hard enough that they say, hey, we need to be able to, raise renewal prices because we believe that is going to circumvent or prevent a lot of domain investors from continuing. Now, in Zach and Nat's article, we'll go through it, and they make a lot of great points, but a lot of them I would argue when it says raising renewal fees would free up names. They're saying no, that likely wouldn't happen because when it's such a good name, a domain investor will pay a high renewal fee. But we know, no, we won't pay $1,500 on hundreds, renewal fee on hundreds of names, or $3,000 renewal on hundreds of names. A business may pay $150, $200. It's not that big of a deal for them to maybe pay a $300 renewal for their business name. And then if they have, even a dozen of them. But for domain investors, it certainly would prevent domain investors from owning what prevents them from owning a bunch of premium names, single word names, and these other extensions, because we're like, damn, I like the name, but $3,000 a year, I'm not going to do it. And if I do it, it's going to be for one or two or three, not for a lot. So, they talk, I would say, going down some of the things in,
hey, Todd, let me, if I could jump in. I think if anyone raises the ante, and this is why I think it's hard for me to get completely behind the ICA, because it's made up of domain investors and domain companies. But the major economic beneficiary of trademark and inappropriate registered domain names is not domain investors. It's registries and registrars. Okay. If there's 612, if Microsoft dot something is taken in 612 extensions, Microsoft may own 30 of those, and 570, the registries and the registrars are getting their money by saying, hey, it's not up to us, it's up to the registrant, But I think the cumulative money and the cumulative market cap of these private companies and public companies that comes from registrations, that if we were to make those as a domain investor, we would lose the WIPO on them. You know what I mean? That I just think that the cumulative amount of money in the system, the ultimate, I don't know if there's a law in legal things, maybe David and Jeff, that the ultimate economic beneficiary of these unsavory practices is VeriSign and is the registrars. You know what I mean? And I just don't think it's domainers.
Well, we're talking a couple different things. You're talking about these parking companies or these people that own a bunch of trademark names. Those aren't names in the aftermarket that sell for high prices. So you're definitely right on. So I know a ton of the guys. They own millions of names, and when there is a UDRP against them, they don't even answer. They just let the name go because they know we make money off of the infringing traffic. And you're right, VeriSign, GoDaddy, whoever, VeriSign, mostly if it's .coms, but really they're domains across all extension that are trademark infringing names, basically getting traffic off of a trademark owner. But that's a separate thing. Those aren't names that are in the aftermarket that sell for big amounts. You don't see those at Adam. You don't see those on the aftermarket. We don't see those on Ron Jackson's list for the last 20 years. And we don't see them on name bio. So all those names true, VeriSign makes money off of it. But they're not discussing this in this report. They're not talking about that. Of course, why would they want to bring it up? Well, basically, they already have an answer. Well, one, they make money off the registration, like you said, and two, if they want to file a UDRP against it, they win. They win against it. So they make money, and then if they want to go ahead and go after it, they basically, not VeriSign, but they tell their corporate customers, hey, listen, we've implemented this hearing, this administrative hearing, or this is available to you to go ahead and get names that if you feel they're infringing. But anyway, these aren't aftermarket names. The domainers own, say, 15% of the available aftermarket. So certainly, Nat and Zach, they talk about domainers. Are they the secondary market? Well, they're not all of it. They're just a portion of it. And of course, we know GoDaddy even mentions to us, listen, you guys got the shitty names. The good names are by this small business that went out of business and then they let it expire, or if they sell it on our aftermarket, but most of the time they let it expire. Those are the names that Paul Nix was even saying that's really the more valuable names, meaning they've been used. They are, just better than most domainers' portfolio. But I'm just saying in that article, the report, 63% of Americans believe domain investors make it hard for a business to start. Well, that's just their feelings, whether it's accurate or not. And, I just, want to argue against domain investors so they can sharpen up. Because I know I could certainly argue for domain investors too, and I will. But when it comes down to the argument against them of, domain, they were talking about domain investing. People think it's easy. Who thinks it's easy? Who thinks it's easy? I don't know anybody thinks it's easy. I think they're saying it's like no one thinks being a ticket scalper is easy, and we know it's risky, but we still don't think it's morally right, and they'll probably try to make it illegal. Any comments from you lawyers about what Paige said, or before I keep going on? I get plenty to talk about.
Well, the registry first, so Page, long time ago, back in the 90s, there were a number of cases against the registrars, and well, at the time it was, VeriSign was both, or Network Solutions was both the registry and the registrar, and there was a whole line of cases that were pretty much affirmed in almost all of the circuits, which say that the registry and registrar are not liable for contributory liability, essentially for contributing to the bad stuff that a registrant does. And then that was codified in, and they cited to Section 230 of the Communications Act, Decency Act. So unless now where there can be an exception is if the registrar itself is the secondary market, or is in some way um, being more involved in the sale of the name than merely being a registrar. I think registrars certainly have an argument to say, well, if they're just providing an auction platform, then, where buyers and sellers come and they just use the the GoDaddy platform, as like eBay, right? Just a place to do business. But that said, GoDaddy also takes control of expired domains. And I think that, and we'll see whether, there's a case I have, right? There's other cases where when GoDaddy is acting as the owner of the name, they can be liable for their activities. GoDaddy says, well, we're not the owner of the name. Look at the contract. Contract says they're not the owner. But with expired names, GoDaddy puts out there, although GoDaddy says the owner is the previous registrant, not the previous registrant that gets the money from the sale, right? It's GoDaddy. So I think GoDaddy's going to have some issues with being completely free of any contributory liability in cases where they step into the shoes of the registrant with expired names. But we haven't really had a case that challenged that, and so we'll see. Um, but a traditional registry has not been found to, if they're just offering it for sale, has not been found to be contributorily liable to the activity of the registrant.
I think the other exception would be if a registry charges a premium renewal and registration rate for a trademark term. So, for example, if VeriSign wanted to increase premium renewal rates for .coms and said, hey, you know what? That's a nice .com. It's a one word. It's going to be $100,000 a year, but that's my trademark. No, now they're cyber squatting on my trademark. They become more involved. They're selectively pricing that name out higher.
Yeah, well, VeriSign would face a lot more issues than cyber squatting at that point. That would be very monopolistic behavior. But I do think you bring up a point with the new registries when they launch. If they're pricing based on the brand, and there were a couple TLDs that did that, and they were basically reported to ICANN, and ICANN took some action. But I remember when what was the oh, like fire.nyc, right? So I was at New Star, and Amazon came after us and said, well, you are charging a premium rate for fire.nyc, and that's our trademark. And of course, our response is, well, you may happen to own a trademark in a certain class, but this is a dictionary word. And if you look, this was, and we explained what our formula was for putting names on the premium list, and had nothing to do with the goodwill of the brand. So I think, yes, if you were to take Nike and make that a premium, or something really famous that's an arbitrary distinctive mark, absent some other objective criteria, you're in trouble. Like if you said all three name registrations are this higher price, all four names are, all strings with 4 characters are this price, then I don't think you're running into a trademark infringement action or cyber squatting, because there's an objective criteria not related to the brand. So registries need good advisors.
Yeah, the VeriSign patent says they price it based on search volume.
Yeah, well, pricing it on search volume in their own TLD, if they used it, there are things that registries can do to price domains based on search volume for when they launch, but doing it after the fact, I think, runs into problems, right? So if you say, well, the first year price is the same for everybody, and then your price increases based on your search, that's going to be, there's some unfair business practices there. But if you're launching and you're saying, well, I looked at the Alexa rankings, for example, and all the terms that are, in the Alexa top 1,000 are priced at this higher price, maybe that's an objective criteria that you could use. But yeah, I mean, new registries when they launch really need some good advice to make sure that when they create the premium names list, they're not doing so based on a non-competition friendly approach.
But Jeff, this is Paige again. When you say they have to be careful, they better watch out, they might be breaking the law. The law at ICANN is what results from a bottom-up consensus-making process through the constituencies, through the GNSO to the board. Is there a law outside ICANN still? Or is it they can
Yeah,
just
I
say, this is
mean,
what ICANN decided, and ICANN is the bottom-up consensus process, and so whatever they say goes. Almost like there isn't another. Is there a check and balance on ICANN when it comes to, quote, the law?
well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a check and balance of ICANN, but it certainly is a check and balance, with national law. National law always trumps, no pun intended there, always trumps uh, the ICANN rules. So if even if ICANN allows something, like there's a lot of things that ICANN allows that registries and registrars could do, but it could be a violation of the law. Whether it's, we've seen that. I mean, we haven't seen any registrars that have been, um, you know, subjects to investigations, but um, you know, there could be monopolistic actions that could be um, taken against registrars, and there's also privacy laws that are in addition to or may even conflict with what ICANN allows. So yeah, the national law, the applicable jurisdictional law to that registry or registrar absolutely is given precedent over anything that ICANN does or does not allow.
Well, thanks, Jeff. And Todd, thanks for this room, because I think that when domainers, I'm probably defensive, I'm protective of when we get picked on because we're maybe decentralized, we're all out for each other. I mean, anything like this where I just want to be equipped to have some other discussions about what I want to be able, as an industry, domain name investors, the domain name investor community, to be able to be equipped to say, well, as long as we're going to talk about what's not right, let's get into everything that's not right. And I just feel like that's the reason I shared what I shared. So great room, Todd. Glad you have it, and glad it's a place to formulate these thoughts.
Thanks, Paige. And I have one more question for you. And because you're a domain investor like me, and we'll ask the lawyers too. I know, David invests. But before I get at the question, I wanted to say about ICA. I'm glad that Nat and Zach wrote this article. It's not necessarily a rebuttal right to this report, this so-called report by this Digital Citizens Alliance, but it, goes through. Basically, it's addressing the legitimacy of domain investing as a business. Now, this is something that, Paige, when we're at the next ICA meetup and we're on the calls, that I definitely like a little bit of time that's taken, this legal time that's spent on the UDRP reform, and they got that pretty much, handled. That we need to be ready, we need to get together, and we need to have some answers in case this picks up more momentum. I'm saying this movement against domain investing, but this movement that looks like VeriSign wanting to be able to increase their renewal costs or take back control of the aftermarket. We certainly, go right to the end. If they said you're limited, you can only have 50, you can only register 50 .com names, and you might have restrictions on those 50 that you register, meaning you might have to show that you're some way that you're planning on using them and so on. So we need to be ready, at least we can work on it and be ready to answer some of these questions. So my question for you, Paige, is Zach mentioned and Nat in their article that it's a myth that domain investors control the price of domain names. Do you think domain investors control the price of domain names?
You mean the registration price?
No, the price in the
Or the
aftermarket.
values? Yeah, I would say domain investors do not. I believe it is a inefficient market, but the market does control it. And if I ever had to show how and why, it would mostly be showing how there was almost no way to determine any consistency whatsoever to even say anything controls the price of domains, much less domain investors. You know what I mean? Because we can look at a name on Twitter. I just sold this name for 14,000, and the day before it could have been an expired auction, and nobody would have bought it. So I think that that if ever called on, I'm sure some of the data scientists could come up with, in essence, the thought that there is almost no way to even show that there's logic to show that somehow the domain investors are controlling the direction, would be my reply.
Well, David, before you answer, so Paige, do you control the pricing of the domains in your own portfolio?
I do.
Right. So, I mean, so in a sense, you do control your own pricing. I mean, some domainers absolutely, they don't even care if they don't get any sales. They're controlling the price. They decide, and if it's overpriced, they'll just stick with it, and maybe they'll have no sales their entire career. Now, because I will say, well, David, how would you answer that question? And we're going to talk about this
Well,
just for
let
a
me
minute.
just, before we get to that, and I don't want to take any of David's time, but yes, if I set my prices at an unreasonable level, there is no market to control because there is no market because there's no transactions happening. So what they might be trying to intimate is that someone has to buy a name from me, and that therefore I set the price. But there are choices, and just like in any antitrust case, you would show how you don't control something, you don't control something. And if someone wants to say, well, if I want that exact name, then I have to pay your price. There's the whole idea of you could get another name. So that's my thought. Go ahead, David.
Yeah. There is a guy named Ronald Coase, very famous economist and legal theorist, and he developed something called Coase's theorem. And it's about bargaining and costless, like no fees for discussing things. But there is a market for stuff. And if they're competing parties, the top party will pay the price for the domain name. Now, we set fixed prices. So how does that work? Well, to efficiently allocate our portfolios and make money, if I have 1,000 names, I must price my names in a way that will sell in a reasonable period of time so I'm profitable. If I price everything at $10 million, I'm not going to sell any of them because I don't have that kind of names. And I'm not going to make a profit. And so that's not going to be sustainable. So according to his theorem, there's an efficient allocation. I will price my domains as the market will bear so that I get enough sell-through rate so I can make a profit. And the buyers are happy. Except, like, when you have, like, say 2 or 3 names and you say it's $10 million or $380,000 in the case of the Adams guy, well, he didn't have anything to lose because he just has that one name. It's an extra $12 a year for him, or 20, whatever. But if he has 1,000 of those or 10,000 of those names, he's got to be more reasonable and figure out, okay, what price is going to work for this kind of name, and just price them and then sell them that way. So I think that's the way it should be working. Now, some people say, well, I just have make offer, make inquiry. That results in a lot lower sell-through rate.
Okay. I mean, I like the efficient market theory, but I don't know how it works with domains. But I'll just say, in the article that Zach put together, some about the quote, they must be willing, this is the domain investor, must be willing to sell at prices that buyers find attractive. Right. Otherwise, they might not be profitable, but they certainly don't need to do that. I guess my point is, there's really definitely no efficient market, whether there's a real market, meaning, we need 20 times, 30 times our investment on each name because we sell so few. And I just don't, to me, domain investors don't control the overall market, what's going on out there, but they have so much control over their own portfolios. And some people are just really willing to get down to what we call, basically a true market for names because they see enough sell through that they're pricing their names to where, yeah, it is attractive for the buyers when there's so many folks with portfolios that know, you know what? I think a lot of investors do this. They just keep their prices really high, hope for the super home run, and they believe that if they don't get it, there's always going to be a time when they can lower prices, when they can get their money back, meaning they do believe there's some liquidity to it. Meaning basically just this. Some of you guys in the audience know you got some big names, you hold them for the biggest big price, and if you ever get your back up against a wall where you need some dough, you feel like you can come down till finally maybe you'll, I don't know, find a buyer at a certain level. But anyway, I just believe
Yeah, I
there's.
mean,
Go ahead.
part of the thing is that there's no objective way to measure the value of a name, right? Like manufacturing. When you buy something, right, in theory, there's an objective way to do pricing, or with services, right? Charge a certain amount per hour, and then you know if something takes, or even for goods, right? You want a 25% margin. So you take all your costs and you then add 25%. The pricing of secondary market of domains there's no real objective rationale to the pricing. It's basically whatever a buyer is willing to pay, which, as you said, is an inefficient market, and it's really inefficient when someone is using one name to subsidize all the risk they took on the other names, right? Because that results in inflated pricing because you're hoping to not just recover your costs plus a reasonable profit on that one name, you're hoping to recover your costs and reasonable profit on a bunch of other names. Um, so it's not exactly the market sets the pricing, other than whatever a buyer's willing to pay.
Well, but Jeff, there's also the idea of it. There is a use value at domain name. There is a consumption value of a domain name that you can use it to operate a business. And then secondly, there's a carrying cost to a domain name. So once you figure out what it's worth, what you should pay for it, then you have the concept of you could always use it, right? So you have that alternative. So that's why I just don't think, I think
What do
they
you
want to
mean?
project
Let
onto
me
us.
challenge. What do you
Go ahead.
mean you can always use it? You mean you can
You can
use it
use
and
the
create
domain name
more
to operate.
value?
You can operate a business on it.
Right, but that's,
Reselling a domain name, the resale value of a domain name is not the only way to profit from owning that domain name.
oh, sure, yes, of course. But if you just have a name that's for sale and you haven't done any use, you haven't used it, you haven't generated traffic, um, then the value is really, the cost is what you paid for it, which no one knows, and then then who knows what kind of profit you're getting. Um,
But I'm just saying, Jeff, that just like someone could say, well, if I have to have your name, you can set the price wherever I want. The reverse is not true. They can't say you have to sell it to me for this price because I'll be like, no, I'm going to use it.
okay, but still, it's an arbitrarily inflated price based on what you believe a buyer would pay. I mean, can you imagine if Apple went out there and charged, initially for iPads or whatever, they're going to go, okay, well, we think buyers would pay, the first set of buyers would pay $1 million. And then they kept, and then that's what they sold it for. I mean, that's not the market determining the pricing, really. It's kind of Apple taking something that people need, and view that they don't have necessarily a substitute for, and using that to kind of gouge consumers. Um, just think about that in terms of, and even like real estate has values, right? You could always look at what the the business or the residence pays for taxes. You have comparables in like that are next to that house. It's really difficult to find comparables in a secondary market because A, the values aren't always disclosed as to what people sell it for. It's not a public, thing. And B, how do I don't even know what a comparable would be of, let's say, when they were looking for ring.com, right? The company that bought ring.com. What's a comparable of that?
Um, Hold on, I want to get to Arif, but Jeff, I wanted to say, Paige does bring up I would say the point that he brings up is it's like selling a house. It's empty, and you're like, hey, well, you tell the buyer, I could live in it. Well, they know you could live in it. It's like a domain. We know you could build on it. You could, you could build a big company on it and lose a lot of money, or maybe you can turn it into some profit. But I think I like your thought provoking response. But Arif first, let's go to Arif, see what he's doing and what comment he has, and then we'll
Hey
go
guys,
with the other.
first of all, really, really good session today. Ultimately, I think it's supply and demand, except for it's a lot more complex than that, right? It's I always say domains are this magical mix of technical elements, right, which you could probably assign certain specific values to, depending on the certain attributes, technical attributes. But then there's also a mix, so it's a mix of technical stuff, but also a mix of art as well. Sorry, Steamy's having a little bit of a session here, but yeah, and art is very speculative, and it's the eye of the beholder. And not only for domains is like there's always that element of everyone has a different perception of the value and what it represents, but it's also a lot of people just don't understand domains to begin with, right? So you have this whole hodgepodge of varying sort of elements that factor into what the value could or could not be, and everyone's going to have a different answer. That's why for me, like I'm happy with that, right? Because in the end, it means exactly what was mentioned before. It's an inefficient marketplace, which means we can come in, buy stuff really low, and flip them for good multiples, and make a profit on it. And at the end of the day, I do, however, think that it's really it's the market that really, like the buyers that really establish what can be sold at certain price points, right? Like, I mean, we sell domains at $3,000, or we price our domains at $3,000. In theory, it's because that's the most efficient price point for us to sell them at, right? Sure, somebody could sell for 25 the same domain, but there might not be as many buyers or whatever it is. So, end of the day, it's hard to quantify exactly what part is what part's the science stuff or the technical, which you can be measured, and then just the art of it, right? And every domain, everyone, like there's so many factors, how the word flow, the memorability, all these factors that we say make a good domain. And if it brings somebody to their business, it has a value, right? And again, I think what we're talking about before is that as an industry of the people who are domain investors, we need to be really careful because you say you want to play devil's advocate, but the truth is that there are a lot of people who claim to be investors who kind of go outside the rules, to deliberately get trademark adjacent stuff that really push the limits. And there is gray zones, so it's like sometimes people are doing it because they think they're justified, but there's certainly people who do it in order to profit from somebody's goodwill and their brand, right? And the same thing, like you said before, domainers don't to try to find out who the buyer is and whatever it is, but the problem is that there are some, right?
There's a lot, and if I
Yeah.
want to, like, I got a call a few weeks ago from, they were referred to me, and they basically in a new TLD extension saw. Now it wasn't a very popular new TLD, obviously, but they saw a bunch of famous trademark terms that were available, and they were like, cool, I'm going to take them, and then I'm going to hope that those organizations, and I'll make it up, it wasn't this, but it was like NFL dot whatever, NHL, made MLB, you know and again, it wasn't those, but it was like that where they had a certain entity in mind when they bought the name, and they were available in this TLD, which again wasn't a very popular TLD, but was one that I advised this person that came to me. I was like, look, you can't do that. That's not, you know, you're telling me you bought these names, and want to resell it at a higher amount to the organizations that have that name. And there's a lot of, people that quote discover domain names and engage in this kind of practice. And that's what costs businesses a lot of money, right? So let's say NHL, they didn't want a dot horse, let's say. But now someone's got it and they're coming to me trying to extort me, and saying, that they're selling it for $3,000. I mean, it's things like that. As you said, there are investors or squatters. There are squatters that are investors
Yeah.
that
I- I-
do take advantage, and that does give the industry a bad name, and it lends credence to the arguments that VeriSign and others make about having regulation in the secondary market.
Yeah, yeah, because these people who do this, like obviously we don't refer them as investors because we like to think investors are the ones who follow the rules. But in the eyes of the outsiders, right, we're all in the same boat, right? So somebody who's doing that, they're going to put us in the same boat as them, right? And that's wrong, right? Because it's like there's certain rules, and like for me, the URP is something I think that should be respected, right? Actually, the three protocols I think are reasonable, and it's just the problem I have with the URP isn't so much the rules. It's that some people misinterpret them or interpret them
Sure.
in a very extreme ways that are kind of a little bit biased. But that's here or there. But the other problem we have, biggest problem, is that most people who go online to build something, whether it be domain investors or even end users or whatever it is, don't understand or don't don't have a deep education in trademark law, right? And so people will sometimes come in and they'll buy something and they think there's nothing wrong with it, right? They think, oh, we can do that. Like everybody's done that before because they always hear these stories, so they think they can do it too. And that's a big problem, is that the educational aspect of it is just a hill that's almost impossible to really overcome when it comes to educating the mass, the mass audience of people who want to consume domains. Whether
Right.
it be
But you
end users
say, and Arif,
or
you
yeah,
say you follow the rules, but what are the rules? Right? Your rules may be different. And I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that's what supports the Digital Citizens Alliance view of saying, yeah, these should be written down somewhere and these should be enforced. Because your rules are maybe admirable and good, but like you said, there's very few people that know about those rules, nor is there the ability for them to find those rules.
yeah. And
So,
even
yeah,
worse, you have judges or panelists who have opposite decisions on the same situation, right? So even the experts can't always agree. That's what I would say. Like, with domains and trademark stuff, there's like so many gray zones, right? And it's our responsibility to really see past what's black and what's white. But there's sometimes when it's gray and it's really it's you can't fault somebody for getting that domain or vice versa, right? You can't fault somebody for being upset, and it's just it's this weird world we live in, and it's kind of like a little bit chaotic. And again, sometimes that chaos can be beneficial to us, right? But at the same time, if we're trying to make ourselves look respectable and that we're trying to follow the rules as much as possible, like the laws, or maybe not rules but laws or whatever it is, it's sometimes it's difficult even for those who are actually trying,
Arif,
right?
maybe at like 7 or 8 p.m. your time, you or David do a pop-up room so we can really, because I got a lot I want to talk about, but I want to get to our cases, so we get out of here like in 20 minutes from now. But I want to go to Domain Insider first, but everybody look on X tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern or 8 p.m. Eastern, around that time. Maybe David, maybe Arif will open a pop-up room, because David, the email that you sent me about, I have a lot of rebuttals to that. I mean, and basically about valuing domain names. I love the conversation, but we don't have all the time in the world here. Domain Insiders never joined us on stage before. Look forward to
Hi,
this.
Todd. It's David.
Oh, that's right, David.
Great room, Jeff, David. I just wanted to bring up one point. Why people think or believe that domains are different than many other things. There are people in the world and in the States that own tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of acres that are not being used. They are for investment, they are for protection, and nobody can come to them and tell them, I want you to sell me these 5,000 acres. If he doesn't want to sell them, and it doesn't matter if he's using it or not, other than public use that you would have to buy it from him, nobody can come and say, well, listen, I want to put a nice house here and I want you to sell me this piece of property. In front of my house, there is a piece of land that last year somebody offered the owner $20 million and he said, thank you very much. And the same thing happens in the art world or in any asset. So why domains should be different? Somebody may have a domain and he's waiting for the right time to retire, to have capital to develop it. He is not obliged to sell it. He bought it. He pays every year his renewal, like anybody pays taxes on the real estate property if it's being used or not. And just somebody can't come up to him and tell him, listen, I like the view of your property and you must sell it to me because you are not using it. So I don't know from where it comes, this idea from people that I can have only 50 domains or 100 domains. Nobody told Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos that they can't own millions of acres. And they do, and they have no problem with it.
Well, David,
And the government has no problem with them owning millions of acres. They are the top owners of real estate land in the United States. So why somebody's going to come and limit me or you that I can't have 5,000 domains? If I have the money to renew them, they are mine. And if I don't have the money to renew them, they will drop and anybody can go and buy them. And if the guy who bought Icon, maybe, which is not the case, I don't know, but if somebody bought Icon 30 years ago and kept renewing it for 30 years because he called his dog Icon, and that's why he bought that domain, and 30 years later, he realizes that the market says that that domain's worth a lot of money. And the guy doesn't need money. So he ends up deciding that he will sell it for $11 million or $12 million. For him, $5 million was not enough. How many people have declined big offers? I have declined big offers. And then the buyer went away and another buyer came and bought the domain. So I just wanted to bring this up. Why some people have the right to think that domain names are different than me owning an antique car or owning a building or owning a mall. If I have the money and I pay the renewals, I can buy as many malls as I want. That's what businesses do. So
David,
I don't.
But you're subject to regulation. A
What's the
lot of
regulation?
regulations. There's
What
a
do you mean?
ton of there's a ton of laws and regulation around real estate, whether commercial or residential.
Yes, but wait a
And
second. Wait a second. If I buy David.com and I want to sit forever and not do nothing and have an email there, as long as I pay my renewal and I don't do nefarious things, I don't traffic drugs or kids or anything, who are you to tell me what to do with David.com?
Jeff, let me jump in here to say, David, no one can. That's the whole point is right now you can own 5,000 names. You can own all sorts of different names. If it's a trademark name, of course the trademark owner
I'm
has
not.
the
Let's
UDRP.
keep it. Well, we
No,
are
but
not
people
talking
have the
about
right.
trademarks.
Hold on, people. But no,
Let's forget trademarks.
okay, forget trademarks then. But what I'm giving you is, yeah, there's been people that have got a $5 million offer for property, declined it, 20 million, declined it, and then it was taken away from them because of eminent domain, because a municipality, a city or state or the federal government wants to build a railroad track or wants to build
Beautiful.
build yeah or build a highway. So that's where they're trying to move it. So right now you can legally own as many domains as you want. They're trying to change the rules and say, okay, if we need some of these names to have the internet highway grow. So you're saying, why should someone, you can own a lot of property, but the government can come in and take it away from you. Okay. The government can come
At
in.
whatever the fair market value is,
Right,
not
and
at what
then
price
and
you want.
if it's a private entity, we've seen before where a casino tries to build a casino, and it's a private company, and they can't get around the old woman with the house right in the center of it.
And
But
they pay for her as much as they want.
sure,
I'll
sure,
tell you one thing, Todd.
yeah.
A friend of mine bought a house here in Panama, a $5 million house. He has many kids, many ideas in his mind, and he wanted the house next to his. And the guy was a doctor, very successful, happy with his house. And he went next door and told him, I want to buy your house. It's not for sale. And he kept giving him offers until he offered him 3 times more the value of his house. And the doctor probably said, you know what? I will never again, ever get an offer like this. And he sold the house. So if the guy who was selling icon.com wouldn't want to take 12 million, the people would have gone and looked for another domain, and it would look
David, I
for another
understand that.
word.
I'm talking about when the government steps in. So right now you're allowed to do
When the
that.
government steps in, there are laws,
You,
and they are going to come and pay you whatever the market says
and that's
for that.
that's an issue. No one knows what the market would be. It's not now the market price. That's what we were just discussing earlier.
No,
Some
but when we
domainers,
were discussing that they're going to put a limit, how many domains and what you're
that's what they
doing,
would
and
like
if
to
you're
do.
using.
That's not in action now. But what they would, if the government said, "Hey, we're taking over the internet. It's not growing as fast as we like. We believe domain, like I said with eminent domain. If they say we need some of these names here, that's what the big concern would be. Right now, no, you can own as many as you want. We got to. I appreciate the conversation. I hope you're around a little bit later if we continue it.
All right.
Jack, okay, thanks for joining us. We're trying to get
I
to our
think there are
cases.
many other options out there,
Yeah,
and they should get their best name possible.
yeah. But domainers, right? Domainers want to say that each domain is individual, and it's unique. But then, soon as we also like to say you can build on any name. We'd like to say that to people to show you can build on
Because
any name you want. But then again, each name is unique. Um,
yeah, because is that a problem? Like, are businesses in the world failing because they don't get their first choice of their domain that they want?
They fail. They fail for both reasons, right? They get the first
Yeah.
choice and they still fail, or they don't get the first choice and they fail,
Yeah,
and vice versa.
that's what I'm saying. It's a hard argument to make. I would
Yeah.
think that businesses
Okay.
are failing because they're
I
not
hope
getting.
you do open a room later. Jack, go ahead, and then we've got to get to our cases. What's up?
Hi, thank you, Todd. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say that I agree completely with what David said. It's something that I had in my mind from a week or since the alliance stuff is going on. But in the other side, to the example, I can say that I know, and I just checking meanwhile we're talking, that there is some restrictions about buying excessive amount of land for preventing land hoarding, for example. Some governments can restrict individuals or companies from owning excessive land to avoid monopolies or speculative hoarding, or even agricultural land limits apply also. For example, I know in countries like India or Philippines or in Africa, there are some laws that are for how much farmland a person or a family even can own. This is to protect small farmers or promote food security. Also, there is national security, even for citizens. Some lands near military areas, borders, or infrastructure zones. There are also some legal consequences about it, about owning a large tract of land. Can even trigger special taxes, regulations, scrutiny, even if it's not outright banned. I mean, there are some rules against buying excessive amounts of land.
Well, thanks, Jack. You bring up good points, and there's all sorts of restrictions. They'll restrict who can buy land if you're not a citizen now, how much you can buy in certain, definitely urban areas, what you can do with it, and definitely restrictions on amounts you can buy. So there are restrictions all over the place, and that's why in Colorado, I know there's restrictions on when you buy it, how can you sell it, meaning in what the size of parcels and so on. So you're right on. There's tons of restrictions, and it's really a tough comparison to domain
And
names.
disclosure, right?
Yeah.
Disclosure. You have to disclose the price, what was paid for it, and you have to disclose, right, the taxes. So there's required disclosures that don't exist in the domain market. Like, there's a question: would you, as a domain investor, support the requirement to disclose the price that you sell a name for? Ultimately, the ultimate sales price.
Yeah, well, some people say yeah. So I guess we'll try to get
Well,
to our
it
cases.
depends on what country you live. You know, every country has their own regulations for businesses. My company selling domains in Panama is not the same regulation of taxes like in the US. So you can't make these equal for the for the entire world. .com is an extension used by people all around the world. So you
Uh,
can't make decisions on just on the US because I don't live
so-
in the US.
Sorry for jumping out. I just forgot something. Excuse me. There is another point that I think that is the main question here. The question is how much is a lot? For example, if there are regulations to buying land, I guess it's something specific about how many acres you can buy of land. How much is considered a lot? For example, huge domains owns, we all know, millions of domains, maybe 3 million domains. So probably this is going to be in the not allowed section. But for all of us, little domains, even those that have 100,000 domains, 300,000, maybe they are going to be fine because it's not considered a lot. This is the main question. How much is going to be too much? So maybe we all gonna be fine because not too many of us own 200, 300,000 domains. Maybe this regulation is, if it happens, it will be for these companies that own millions of domains. So actually, all this can be beneficial for all of us because imagine someone like huge domain that have uh, a big portion of the good domains under their assets, suddenly they are not allowed to do that because they're even using automatic tools. So for us, it's going to be beneficial. This is just my point of view.
A lot to consider. I guess, Jeff, David, we're going to put our cases off till next week. We'll stay open for another 5 minutes with this conversation, and then we'll just put our cases
Yeah,
to next week
I
because we're
think
not going to blow
that's
through
I
them.
think that's good, Todd.
Yeah.
And my question is, I would love people to consider, disclosure not only of what you sell it for, but what you bought it for, obviously, because that would be its whole chain of title. So a buyer would know that you bought a name for $1,500 and you're offering for sale at $10,000. Now, I think a lot of domain investors would say, no, I don't want that disclosed. But that's what an efficient, like a real estate market, would be disclosed. What you paid for it, and what additions or whatever you made to it, and what you're selling it for.
Yeah, but that would assume that you can use domains as comparables, right? And the truth is that there are some you can compare, but for the most part, domains don't
Yeah.
live in the same world.
But the problem is, if you make that argument, it's what Todd said before, which was the great point, which is on the one hand, you're arguing to prospective buyers, hey, each domain's unique and you want to buy this one. You don't want to go anywhere else. This is the perfect name for you, right? This is a unique name. This is the name you want for your business. There's no comparable name out there. You want to buy this one. But on the other hand, now you're saying, well, there is nothing comparable. You can't make both arguments.
Well, I mean, like, look, somebody bought a rotten banana masking tape to a wall for how many millions of dollars? And everybody else in the world would say that's crazy, right? So that's the difference with domains. Is like it's not like, okay, 3 standard bedrooms within a half a kilometer from a school or that type of stuff, right? There are again, I said before, there are technical elements, but there also is an artistic element, and it's like you're selling a house, but it's a house filled with pieces of art, where it's like, yeah, the house has a certain value where you can attribute to the again, the number of rooms, square footage, the distance from certain amenities and whatever it is in schools. But then the art inside is subject to really people's preferences and interpretation, and that's why it's really difficult to really
Yeah,
assign values.
of
David,
course.
just one second. By the way, how many people have found paintings in flea markets that got 10 and 20 and 50 million dollars for those paintings and are sitting at the Guggenheim or the Metropolitan? Who nobody
But wait a second,
cares.
David, and Arif, and we're talking about trying to compare domain names to art, and just for example, the banana duct tape banana piece, that was not just a piece of art. That was made by a world-renowned established artist that had been extraordinarily successful for years prior. Okay. And number two, the whole art market is very, very small, and it's controlled by some of the wealthiest corporations and entrepreneurs in the world, and they keep it that way. So it's not comparable to this, because something about, number one, domain names are a very new market, 25 or 30 years, generally speaking. And you don't have to study art, go to school, or go to museums to learn about what art to buy. Anybody in the world who has a phone can buy a domain name, right? So
Art is a
it's
terrible comparison because it's
Well,
unessential. Hold on, real fast. I got to say, and Brad, I'm glad you got into this filthy conversation. It is
okay.
the mud of what we're talking about. But if somebody say they're building that Tesla factory in wherever the outside of Austin, and say somebody went in there, whether it's Elon or some other company went in there and bought all the property and all the housing, and then said we're going to charge minimum for a 1 bedroom apartment $10,000 a month. You can bet the legislatures, the county, the city, basically the laws, they would say you can't do this. You fucking ruined it. Meaning, so art is separate. So when we're talking about a house, and if somebody owned all the real estate in an urban area and they held the whole city hostage, yeah, believe it or not, laws would change. So that's with domains really can't be compared to either one, but closer to real estate, and that's why people always do it. But it's not. In the truth of the matter is, does owning, domain investors, do we get in the way of companies um, being able to do business? And it's like, no, they can do it on any of
Right.
these names, any of these extensions, but yet then why then but we build up that no, this one is different. This one gets type in traffic. This one has authority. And then the .com, now all the money. So we do try to play both sides. You can build on anything, but yet
Right.
it's
And then
well,
I
subject to
was just going to
liability.
add as well, um, to the buyer, it's not art. To the buyer, it's a necessity to have a domain name, right? In order to be on the web, you have to have a domain name. And so while you may argue, well, this is like art, it's a great name, and the buyer is saying, no, 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 this is, I need to get on the internet, and this is the name that matches my business, or this is, um, you know, a name that I need. It's not art to me; it's a
Yes, but
necessity.
you decided to use that name after I bought the domain 10 years ago. And that's why
But everything
Tesla.
that the point is, everything's taken. That's their point. So, like, if I start a new business
But let
now,
me ask you something. Isn't it Manhattan all taken and you have to pay when you want to buy a piece of land in Fifth Avenue? Pay whatever you need to pay to get it if that's the one you want to get? Why nobody is telling me that
No,
Fifth
this is
Avenue,
the name of a business, right?
a
This
business
this
that
this is
you
not a
just
house.
decided 3 years ago to call Tesla, and Tesla.com was taken, and it took them a number of years till the seller decided to sell it, and he got $11 million. And if
Any
he,
name you could think of for the name of a business
yes,
is already taken. Period.
And
On the
you know
web.
something else is going on, and just getting back to the whole thing about regulations, and eventually, Jeff, you mentioned eventually it's going to get stronger. You know, this opposition group that's trying to gain control. It's all about control, and as domainers, we have very little when it comes to the big money coming in and changing the rules, or having millions of dollars of lobbyists going in to make sure that, so I'm bringing this up, that we really need to prepare to defend our position, because we're talking about real estate and art. Those are, thousands of years old of assets that they've changed the rules over the years.
But
They're,
but they're not. But they're not either, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Like, you guys are taking
right, it's
my
not either.
example of the
So
art
that's
too
why
much, but
it's
it's a
even
mix.
more
But it
we're
is a
even
mix of
more
both.
vulnerable.
But here's the thing, for Jeff, to reply what you're saying, like, there is an element of subjectiveness and art to it, because it's not that the people don't have to have a specific domain. They look at different domains as their doorway to their customers, right? Or for their customers, I should say. And what they want is something that's a pretty door, a memorable door. Again, there's aspects of that doorway that you can make that are tangible, right? There's certain ease to come in and certain technical things, but also, again, what attracts people to their business. And that's not always technical. That is subjective and artistic. And that's one element of it. That's the doorway.
Yeah,
But then
but
you also
RF,
have,
you always need a name for your business, right?
sure, it doesn't have to
Right?
be a specific name, right? It doesn't have to be a specific doorway. It doesn't need to be a specific address. Yes, some are
But
better than
there's
others.
but the
But
point they're making is any name that you can think of that's pronounceable is taken, and it's not just taken by individual investors, but taken by branding companies that essentially take it. They go through and they figure out every possibility of pronounceable names. They take it so that there is no possible way to come up with a name that is one word, that you can find one word, one string, it's pronounceable. I challenge anyone to hand register a a, uh, a .com that is one word, pronounceable. Yeah, just one word and pronounceable. Not even like
Yeah,
so
now
Jeff,
attractive.
that
let
you
me
said
ask you one
.com,
question, Jeff.
now that you said
Jeff, one
.com,
question only.
hold on, we got to
They
hear
are
from
there are
Samit, but I want to
thousands
talk to
of single
David.
words.
David,
1 second only. There are 1,000 words hold in the hands of Fortune 500 and 100 companies that are not being used.
right?
Are they going to go to those companies and tell them you are not using all those single words that you bought 25, 30 years ago? You got to hand them over,
Well,
and they're going to
possible.
hand them over?
Here's the point, David. You're right. Right now, it's like an apartment building in downtown Miami. Some people are charging $1 million a month rent, and some people are charging $10,000 a month rent, which is, let's say $10,000 a month is the average going price. Well, if there's no rules, and people in the building, there's like half the building's empty because most of the people are charging $1 million a month. Well, you have the right to do that until finally the government steps in and says, listen, now no one can live in the city because you guys can charge a reasonable amount, but you can't gouge. And that's the argument that the other side is making, that when is it gouging? Because you can sell your property for what you want. You can rent it out for what you want. But even in places where there's no rent control, if you own a building, own an apartment, and you're charging $1 million a month, and you have several apartments in that building, and none of them are being rented out, eventually, right, there's going to be legislation. There's going to be somebody that comes in and says you're gouging, So we are going to control the rents in this area. I mean, it happens all the time. Samit, what's going on? Thanks for joining us. Oh, okay. So he wasn't here. I thought
Todd,
Samit came on stage.
I would like to say something that, in contradiction to what I will say. As a matter of fact, I had registered just before ChatGPT came out. I had registered a domain that was looked like a type of a word, very popular word right now. And in that time, when I registered the name, that specific term was nothing, was like a typo. After ChatGPT, the term became an actual word, and David, as he's here in the conversation, he knows about it. Uh,
Jack, your
and
audio has been terrible the whole time. A lot of us can almost hear you, but
oh,
now
sorry,
it's yeah.
sorry, it's entering in my picture. Um, so I did register a domain that is a single word, but in the moment I registered, it wasn't a word. Now it's a word, and now it have a lot of value. Actually, many companies are branding their companies with this name, with this term. So I don't agree with what I would say. So what we should do? We should stop being creative and not register names because one day will become
No,
one word.
he's not saying that. He's not saying that, but you bring up a good point of I was going to mention earlier that sometimes names we don't know the value. It's like I'm telling you this is going to be a word in the future and they're like, "Todd, how do you know?" And I'm like, "Just sit back and shut up." And then also it's like keystrokes. These are short keystrokes in the future that's going to be real valuable. Or, this is like I said, a word that's going to be mean something. And years from now, it's going to be used a lot more frequently. So it's tough to value those types of names. We're almost done here.
Uh,
Summit, are you there? I see you're on stage. Wanted to see Media Wizard.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a myth that all the names are taken, you know. If you just look at 5letter.coms, for example, I think there are over 11 million possible combinations. All possibly couldn't be taken. Now you add 6 letters and it will be somewhere around 350 million more. You take 7 letters, that's another 3,000 million, 3 billion. This is a fallacy that all good domains are taking. Your problem is
Pronounceable. It's pronounceable, right?
pronounceable, Jeff.
You can get a name that is
No,
NXTSTPQ.
no, 1 sec. You don't have to have don't covet thy neighbor's wife kind of thing. You know? You don't have to have the domain I own. You go to lean domain search, put in any keyword, you'll find 500 available domains, or at least 50. Any keyword. And your problem is not that domains aren't available. Your problem is that you want what you would have to pay for free. That is such a woke argument. I'm sorry, but just doesn't
No,
work.
but
Well, it's
he's
an
talking
argument. It's
about
not a
a
woke
dot
argument. It's not
com.
a great argument. I'm with you, Summit. It's not a woke argument. So I don't know why you bring that up. But I was going to say you're right that I don't agree. All names are. There's so many names that are available now. If Jeff said I can't find a pronounceable 4-letter that's available in .com, he's right on. You can't find a 3-letter that's available. So that is true. And are a lot of and we talk about these names, but we talk about mostly are there a lot of 3-letter .coms that aren't developed, just like a lot of pronounceable 4-letter .coms that aren't developed. Yeah, so there's a lot of them out there that you're thinking, I want a 3-letter acronym or I want a 4-letter pronounceable, and there's tons of them that are not developed, but there's none that are available. So there's tons that are not, and you're right. Well, you just came late to the game, so you can't get those. And same with single words. So I think, Jeff, he's not a domain investor, but he's trying to say, listen, he's just saying there are groups of good names, of valuable names that none are available, like actually just all 4-letter, all 3-letter. And if you're like somebody, I want a 4-letter domain name and I want it, and it can
But
be
there are
any
4
pattern,
billion people
you
on the
have to buy it
internet,
on the
Todd.
aftermarket, which is fine,
Yeah, you
which is
have to buy it
legal
on
and
the
fine,
aftermarket.
but it's a fact.
There are 4 billion people on the internet. There are only 350 million registered domains. There's
Yep.
a lot of headroom out there. You're telling me the internet is already full? The
No, I'm
1800
not.
seats
I'm
in
not
which
saying
you
the
live
internet's
yesterday.
full. I'm saying you're right.
Yeah,
I
come
think there's
on.
plenty. I can find any
The
business
problem
a
is
good
you
domain name
want
for their
something.
business.
I want a Ferrari. No one's giving me one for free, man. It's such an
Nobody's
unfair
saying
world.
it's nobody's saying it's for free. What the argument is that you're not paying an objective price for it. You are paying
Jeff, let's do this. Please give me a keyword right now. I'll find you 5 available good domain names
income,
right now.
Well, sure,
income.
sure.
.com.
I mean, you're right. That's not the argument,
And
Summit, because
registrable,
I could say,
not
yeah,
in the
barber
aftermarket.
shop, and you can go to lean domain search and find modern barber shop, fast barber shop, quick. There's going to be tons of them that are available with whatever it is. So I know you're right. There's ton, and then if we go to other extensions outside of .com, now we're going to find single words, exactly what Jeff said aren't available. They're all over the place. You can find single, that dictionary word plus an extension. So I think as domain investors, we know that not every good name is taken. In Zach and Nat's article, they talk about that all good names are gone, and is that a myth? And it really, it is a myth. And now with other extensions, we know that. Hey, I appreciate everybody being part of the conversation. I hope your audio gets turned up, Summit, so I could hear you better, because David or Arif may be opening a room later on, 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. Eastern, who knows. But I appreciate everybody being here. We're going to run our cases next week, but we're still going to have a little bit of a conversation next week before the cases, but we will get to our 3 UDRP cases. I really do appreciate all of your input. David, thanks for being here. Jack, thanks for being here. Brad, Arif, definitely, and Summit, I'm glad you joined us. I really am. You guys know that. And of course, to my co-hosts, Jeff and David, thanks for being patient with me and with the guests, and we'll get to our cases next week. Everyone have a great rest of your day.